Hey YouTube, this is Steve from Average Joe's Fantasy Football, and we've got another Dynasty ranking video for you guys. If you haven't already, make sure you guys check out our other rankings. We had running backs, we talked quarterbacks, and again, those rankings to help you guys pre-draft where these players are and possibly with some possible trades, things like that to help you out. Now we are talking wide receivers. Now these rankings are going to be based off of full PPR. Maybe half PPR, but I really kind of talk about full PPR. Now, I'm breaking this up into two videos. You've got part one, which can be 1 through 12, and then part two will be 13 through 24. And there's a great rookie class coming in. So right now, before the draft, these are my rankings of how these players really kind of line up in this particular role. Now, there's some players you may not agree with. There's some players you may agree with. Hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know what your thoughts are. And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the like button as well, and share this with your friends. Maybe not your league mates, but maybe some friends that help you out with that. So we're going to start with number one, and I think most people kind of agree on this. Number one easily is Justin Jefferson. Now, some people may have other players ahead of him, but with Justin Jefferson, losing Kirk Cousins may scare some. But I think the talent of Jay Jetta, and even with what Kirk Cousins being hurt last season, he was still able to put up some big numbers. He had wide receiver 7, wide receiver number 1 numbers. I mean, there were some great games, even with the whole situation at quarterback. Now you're going to another season where, as of right now, Sam Darnold is their starting quarterback. We'll look to see how that draft goes. And I think even with that said, I think his talent is so good that I think he'll still be a top wide receiver. Maybe not number one next season. Well, that's a whole redraft situation. But when it comes to Dynasty, with his ability, his youth, and years to come, I still have Justin Jefferson at number one. Jefferson has the ability to be a top 5. And having Hawkinson back later in the season, having Addison demanding some plays, I think that's going to only help Justin Jefferson, where he's not the only guy. Obviously, TJ Hawkinson being out a little bit of the season, I probably expect him to be out half the season. Does hurt a little bit. And quarterback play is a big factor, don't get me wrong. But I think Justin Jefferson still is going to have games where he can be a top 10 receiver week in and week out in fantasy. So he's got to be my number one. Now, number 2, I have CeeDee Lamb. I know others may have him a little bit lower. I've seen him go down to 3. I've seen him go down to 4. But I have CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver 3. Since becoming the premier weapon for Dak Prescott, Lamb finished wide receiver 5 and wide receiver 1. Last season, Lamb demanded plenty of attention, yet was still able to succeed and put up amazing numbers week in and week out. In the 17 games he played, Lamb had over 30 points in fantasy 5 times, which is amazing. In over half of those games, he was top 10 in fantasy. With a lack of running game for Dallas this upcoming season, that's what is expected. I do expect Lamb to be a continue heavy targeted receiver. Even with Brandon Cook still there, I think Dak and this offense can pass a lot. So I think Lamb's easily going to be a top 1 to 5 range easily. I think he's going to finish number 1 in redraft. We'll see how that plays out, but he is my number 2 when it comes to Dynasty. Now, number 3, I think this is where people are probably going to hit me up in the comments and probably disagree. But I have Amon-Ra St. Brown at number 3. I know others have Chase, but I have him at number 3. Look, Amon-Ra has been amazing. At what point do we consider, not consider him a premier receiver? I think too many people just kind of put him lower and lower. I see him fall easily in startup drafts that I've done, and I don't get it. There's just a lack of respect. I consistently see him disrespected, especially in the redraft world, which is crazy to me. Even if the Lions add another receiver in this draft class, which is possible, I still don't think it will affect Amon-Ra going forward. St. Brown finished last season 25 points a game in the last 4 games, seeing an average of 10 targets a game. With Gibbs and Laporta still in that offense, I think Amon-Ra is going to get plenty of targets his way. I know there's obviously a potential of a receiver in this class, but whether he's double covered, they still got Sam Laporta help clearing the way. You got Jahmyr Gibbs you got to deal with. I think Amon-Ra absolutely number 3. There's no reason I have him any lower. Now, at number 4, I do have Jamar Chase, wide receiver 4 for sure. My only concern for Chase has been really the nagging injuries, as well as Burrow being, missing time. Like, look, Chase could easily be top 3, but the consistent factor of Amon-Ra plus some of the concerns I have with Burrow puts Chase at number 4. Chase had his first 100 reception season, but also dealt with T. Higgins missing some time. So that is also a factor, and I do expect Higgins back in Cincy. I don't think they trade him. Now, I will say this. When Burrow is at quarterback, Chase averaged 14.1 points a game last season. And when Burrow was out, Chase only averaged 12.17 points a game. That's a huge difference. So there's some concern. And with, all the receiving class that this one is here, with all the receivers in this really ranking that I have here, Jamar Chase at number 4, I think is actually a little high for me, but I still think he's good. I think he's going to be right at that spot. Could he move to 3 if Burrow can stay healthy for the next 5+ years? Yeah, it's easy. It's possible. But I think Amon-Ra is just slightly a little bit better, so I put Chase down. Now, number 5, I have Puka Ngata. Look, wide receiver 5 might be a little high for some of you guys, and I get it because obviously there have been the players that have done one and done seasons and then just kind of don't show up. And I get it. Puka also came out, small school where he's not as big. His athleticism was always questioned. He is a big, strong receiver, which is great. But I think this was a perfect option. And going into this past season, you had Cooper Kupp, obviously the Triple Crown receiver. So no one had any respect for Puka at all going into this. But Stafford at quarterback is big. Having a healthy season of Cooper Kupp, I think, is big. I know there were some concerns there, but Puka definitely showed off his consistency and his great receiving ability. He's not the fastest player, I get it. He's not the most athletic, I get it. But he knows defense really well. He knows spatial awareness. He knows when to cut routes. He knows when to get into the open space. He finished last season as wide receiver 4 with over 105 receptions and 6 touchdowns. He averaged 17 points a game, and even when Kupp was in, Puka still put up wide receiver 1 numbers. He had that 180-yard receiving game in the playoffs, and that was with a healthy Kupp. So I do think going into the season, I'm not too worried about it. And then, of course, he's going to be the future receiver for this Rams team. I like him at number 5. Now, my wide receiver 6 is A.J. Brown. Finishing his second year with the Eagles, he is Mr. Consistent, averaging over 1,400 yards the last 2 seasons, finishing top 6 as well at the position. I kept him within that same range because I think he's such a talent and he could dominate games. Now in 2023, there were some concerns when he finished the season. First half of the season, AJ finished top 7 or better 5 out of 9 games. The last 8 games of the season, though, he averaged wide receiver 35 with an average of 12.17 points a game. I won't let that affect my ranking quite yet because I do have, there were some definitely concerns. I do think AJ Brown can be a little bit of a, I would say, pain in the butt in the locker room sometimes. I think he's very vocal, which there's nothing wrong with that as long as he shows up and he does get behind his quarterback. Jalen Hurts definitely struggled, and that team struggled in general. The Eagles kind of fell apart towards the end of the season. But I'm not going to chalk up that and put A.J. Brown any lower on my list. I think wide receiver 6 is the perfect spot for him in my Dynasty rankings. Now at wide receiver 7, I've got Garrett Wilson. Now Garrett Wilson has not been a wide receiver 1 yet since coming into the league. As far as not necessarily his position, but just in general in fantasy. So wide receiver 7 is a little high for, I think, even for myself. I think I've kind of gone back and forth, but I put him at here because he's a great talent. He gets plenty of options his way. I do think the addition of Mike Williams is actually helpful for him. Having a potential, obviously, Rodgers this season that is healthy will help and kind of really show off. But again, you saw it last season. He got a lot of targets, but there were a lot of bad balls thrown his way. So that is the concern I do have, is that he really wasn't, even though he was targeted, he wasn't really given the chance to really show up and show off really well. So the touchdowns are a concern. He only had, he hadn't had more than 5 touchdowns in a season. So that's a little bit of something I want to see some improvement on, which will help him in fantasy. But as long as he continues to get close to the targets he has been, I'm going to put him at number 7. May change when the season kind of starts, but that's where I'm having right now. Now, wide receiver 8 in my Dynasty rankings is my first rookie off the board. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. My first rookie here because he is a top 10 talent coming into the league. His age, he's almost generational. Definitely puts him in a spot that I think, even though he hasn't been put on a team yet as far as this recording, I think he's going to end up landing in Arizona, which I think only helps. But look, he's going to continue that streak for Ohio State. They had Garrett Wilson, Chris Alve, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Like the receiving options, and he was a lot better than those guys. Like that says a lot, especially at that receiving core that they've had in the last few years. So there's a lot of pressure. I get it. Marvin Harrison Sr., Hall of Famer, amazing talent for the Indianapolis Colts, Mr. Consistent, saw targets after targets after targets. And I think he's stronger, bigger. I don't know if he's quite faster. I don't really look into that. I think he's just slightly there. But I think with him pairing up to Kyler Murray, which I think is going to be the expectation, I think it's only going to be even better. I do like this pairing if it does happen. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a top 10 wide receiver in my Dynasty. Number 9, I've got Tyreek Hill, Mr. Cheetah, man. This guy is amazing. Now, of course, if we're talking redraft, I'm having Tyreek Hill a lot higher. But when we're talking Dynasty, you've got to consider the fact that his retirement might be coming soon if he is truthful to what he said last year. His age is up there, right? Sometimes when the speed's gone, where does Tyreek play at? His size isn't always a big, I know size isn't a big deal right now, but when you start losing some of that speed, it might be a concern. But he is definitely still a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty. And realistically, he's been a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy the last few years, even with the changes going from Patrick Mahomes to Tua. I think that has not really played a factor at all. I do like the addition of Jonnu Smith for the Miami Dolphins. I think that helps. You got Jalen Waddle, who I absolutely love, and we'll talk about him in another video because he did not make my top 12. But I like Tyreek Hill at number 9. I think he's going to have a great, next 2 to 3 years maybe. We'll see how that plays out with his retirement conversation, but I like him at number 9. Number 10, I have Chris Alve at wide receiver 10 for the Saints. Look, Chris Olave has had a great season last year, finishing second year beyond 1,000 receiving yards coming into the league. Now he's going in his 3rd year with the Saints, 2nd year with Derek Carr, which is a huge thing because, again, you're building that consistency. You're building that trust. And this offense definitely is going through Chris Olave. Now, Derek Carr does need some help. He needs some offensive line help. They do need to add another receiver. I do like Rashid Shaheed, but for Chris Olave, you do need another dominant receiver, or maybe they go tight end if they were able to get like a really good tight end in this class, which really is Brock Bowers, and I don't see happening. But Olave definitely is a talent coming out of Ohio State. A couple of years ago, he can get open. He makes big plays. He's Mr. Consistency. I think for him, at number 10, I think is a perfect spot where he's at. Now, wide receiver 11, another rookie. I've got Malik Neighbors from LSU. Malik comes into this rookie class as 1B behind Marvin Harrison Jr. And some even have Neighbors a little bit as actually higher than him. I'm not quite there. I'm almost there, but I love Neighbors, and I think he's going to be a great talent into this, into his NFL career. Neighbors shows big playability, and he's really keeping that LSU wide receiver trend going. Coming into the league where you had Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham, Jamar Chase, like some great receivers coming LSU, and I think Malik Neighbors is another one. And we can obviously talk Brian Thomas Jr. as well. Neighbors is coming off a 1,500 yard receiving season, 14 touchdowns. Like, this is going to be a phenomenal talent coming into the league, and he's going to go to a team that is going to be a wide receiver needed team, which means he's going to get plenty of targets his way. Definitely wide receiver 11 in my Dynasty rankings. Now, the last receiver I'm going to talk about in this video, at wide receiver 12, I have Brandon Aiyuk for the 49ers. And that may change. Part of me almost didn't put him at 12. I had somebody else in mind, but we'll talk about that in another video. But I have Brandon Aiyuk here, and I know he's a little bit higher than he's actually performed in fantasy, where he's been wide receiver 16 the last couple of years. But he's absolutely the wide receiver 1 for the 49ers. I know people talk about Deebo Samuel, and Deebo Samuel, as talented as he is, I think he's more gadget play-esque than he is a true wide receiver like Brandon Aiyuk, who has performed really well. Look, I will say this, whether Aiyuk gets traded or if he stays at 49ers, if Deebo's there, that does play a factor. When Deebo is not in the game, Aiyuk sees 6.5 targets a game. When he does play, he only sees about 5.8. So there is some concern there when those two are paired up. If Brandon Aiyuk goes to a team that, let's say Denver, I don't think it's happening, but say he goes to Denver, and I think Courtland Sutton would have to come to the 49ers to make that happen. He would obviously see plenty of targets. Now, obviously, quarterback play does play a factor in this, and I get it. But I still think Brandon Aiyuk is a big deal, and I think he doesn't get enough respect and I think overlooked a lot of times for sure, especially in redraft. We're talking redraft. He's definitely in the later rounds. But I do like this one. In the last 8 games last season, he had 5 touchdowns. And I think it's only going to get better with Brock Purdy. I think Brock Purdy is going to improve. So I would like to see him stay in San Francisco. I think that's his best spot. And I think that's the best spot for him in Dynasty. Now, if he gets traded, his ranking will completely change. But right now, I have him at wide receiver 12. So those are my wide receiver rankings for Dynasty at the current moment. Again, if you have questions of Dynasty, maybe it's trade questions or anything like that, hit me up in the comments down below. Of course, if you agree or if you have comments about this, let me know. I'd love to hear it. Make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel. Check out our other ranking videos. Stay tuned for more Dynasty content. We're going to be doing a lot of rookie content once the NFL draft has been completed. We've got a lot of rankings for there, mock drafts, all that fun stuff. So again, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the like button. I'll check you guys out next time.